Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this Chevrolet 30 hundredweight, or quit if you prefer, truck. The box also says that this is a 1.5 ton 4x2 truck, which makes a bit more sense to my mind anyway. I don't know what a hundredweight is. Google suggests that it's also known as a centimweight, which I guess makes sense with CWT, but that doesn't really help. This kit is obviously made by Rubicon models and is in 28mm or 1/56 scale. The back of the box is pretty standard for a Rubicon kit. There's an illustration that works as a very simple painting guide, a picture of the decal sheet that we'll find inside, and a couple of paragraphs about the vehicle's history and how it was used. Very good. Inside the box we find 2 sprues and a single hood part individually wrapped in plastic. These sprues are very nice and neat, which, if you've seen Rubicon kits before, you probably won't be surprised by. It looks to me as though there are fewer parts than Rubicon kits often have, but then this vehicle is also not very big, so that makes sense. The parts are well moulded and quite neat. I couldn't find any issues, and I did look. Of course, certain issues aren't obvious until you build the kit, but I'm not expecting anything like that. Most of the truck's parts are on the first sprue. The second sprue is mostly crew figures and guns. Rubicon's crew figures are, in my opinion, getting better and better, and these do look rather good, as do the guns. I won't be using the crew in this build, but that's not a reflection on the kit. More that I just don't usually feel like including crew. It's just personal preference, really. If somebody were to somehow force me to use crew, I would be happy to use these. I guess you wouldn't really call this a hood part. Whatever you might call it, it comes as one piece, and like everything else is very nice, neat, and tidy. Having this as a single piece helps to eliminate worry about gaps in what is going to be a fairly prominent part of the model. Decals are unsurprisingly included. I mean, they wouldn't just lie to us on the box like that, would they? That would be mean. There's enough markings here for several vehicles, though you obviously only need enough for one. However, it's nice to have extras laying around. You never know when they could be useful. The instructions are also quite good, as is usually the case with Rubicon. They're well laid out and simple enough to follow. They clearly point out where you have options and things like that, which, well, that is what you want instructions to do, rather than just leave you to guess. Now, let's use those instructions to turn these bits of plastic into a truck. The first step is to glue the axle parts onto the suspension on the frame. This is pretty simple. For the front axle, there are guides on the bottom of the leaf springs, and the shape of the part itself doesn't allow for lateral movement without it obviously looking wrong. The rear axle does have a bit more keying to it, and it also goes into place very easily, which is always nice. I do appreciate this simple axle assembly. It should be stronger and better stand up to handling due to that simplicity and low part count. In a gaming model, that's the kind of thing you want. You might think wheels would come next, but you would be wrong. Instead, I install the tow bar, which more or less just slots into this pair of things at the rear of the frame. There's a fair bit of overhang there, but I'm sure it's still an effective tow hook. Okay, now we can have some wheels, as a treat. You can see there is some keying on these, which is to ensure that the very slight flat spot on each wheel will be in contact with the ground. When I was building this, I could barely see the flat spot, but it is there. I guess it makes sense that this would be very subtle. It's not a very heavy vehicle. Next comes the floor for the rear section of the truck. I just slop a whole bunch of glue on here. Glue for the glue god, as the youth are always saying. There's a couple of guide tabs for this, and it's pretty easy to get the parts together nice and neat. The result is quite floor. Then I add the stowage box parts to the front of the floor part. I add pressure and a little bit of extra glue, just to make sure that everything stays where I want it. Then I put the forward wall on, and instead of removing this after test fitting, I just tilt the part forward, put glue in there, and then push it back together. The lid comes next. It goes on the top, unsurprisingly, and obviously you should make sure that the hinge parts match the hinge parts on the front wall. I add the left wall next, which is pretty easy though the fit wasn't perfect, and I had to apply a bit of pressure. In the end though, it looks fine. The right wall goes on pretty much the same way. There is a bit of a gap between it and the box on the inside, which did confuse me for a moment, but the wall part does fit. There is just a gap on the inside. I'm sure that would be easy enough to hide with stowage or something. The rear flap, or tailgate I guess, goes on next. This fits very nicely, and if you wanted to, you could model it open. Clearly, I've chosen not to do that. There are some filler bits, I guess you might call them, for the underside stowage boxes. These go into place nice and easy, as you can see. Using extra thin glue means I don't need to remove the part to glue it in. The glue will seep in between the gaps and bond it into place. Very handy. Behind the wheels we install mud flaps. These do go on pretty easily, but when looking at this afterward it seems as though they don't quite line up with the wheels. Doesn't seem like there'll be an effective mud flap because of that, but I don't suppose it matters a whole lot. I don't think that's something caused by me putting it together wrong, though obviously it could be. Anyway, it's now time to work on the front of the truck. I start by gluing the gear stick into the centre of the cab part like so. The instructions seem to want the steering column to be installed next, but instead I've decided to attach the hood. Or I guess because this is a British vehicle, bonnet might be the more correct term. Whatever you call it, it goes into place nice and easy with no issue. Then I glue the dashboard into place. The fit here is also quite nice. You can see that this part has a sort of holder thing for the steering column, which is why I figured it would be better to add that part later. And by later, I mean right now. Tweezers were quite helpful here. It would have been hard to get my fat fingers in there. I leave it to bond for a bit before installing the steering wheel, because the time for headlamps has arrived. The headlamps have these sort of streamlined housings, which seem fairly fancy for a wartime vehicle, but I like them, so I'm not complaining. Also, the fit is great. There's one of these for either side, and once they're on, the headlamp part itself goes on. This is the kind that you'll have to paint yourself rather than having clear plastic parts, but I don't think many wargamers are going to complain about that. I then install this thing, which I think is some sort of bracing, which goes here. There's a slight indentation into which it should be glued. A little bit of nudging was needed to get it positioned properly. What I think is an air filter is installed next. I guess it makes sense to have a big air filter on a desert vehicle. You don't want sand getting into the engine. I think that might be bad. The large barrel-y part is pretty simple to get into place. The connecting pipe was a bit more fiddly, but again, tweezers were rather helpful here. I follow this with a box on the running board here. Nothing especially tricky here. I suspect this is for carrying tea. Get it? Because the British like tea? Ha ha ha! Nobody's ever heard that joke before. Next, I install a pair of, well, I guess they're smaller lights, though I'm not sure. One of these goes on either side of the headlamps I installed earlier. The front bumper is next, and this easily mounts into the pair of holes under the grille. I added a bit more glue once it was on just for a bit of extra strength. Then I attach the rear wall, which, to be honest, seems a little bit redundant. It's part of the model though, so on it goes, and it's pretty simple to get into place. Into that gap on the right side of the rear wall, I install this part, which I think is a fuel filler. I did actually have an issue with this, in that I cut off part of it thinking that it was sprue, and didn't realise until it was too late. The drawing in the instructions wasn't totally clear, so it's not entirely my fault. Fortunately, I saved the part and glued it into place. The result is that there is a bit of a gap there, but I'm pretty sure that could be hidden or possibly fixed with putty. Now well, I make the mistakes, so maybe you don't have to. Gee Herbert, you're so noble! I know. It is now time to unite the cab and the frame. I apply plenty of glue to the contact points, and the assemblies more or less just drop right into place. I apply a little bit of pressure, though I wouldn't say it's actually needed, and some extra glue along the bottom just because, and it's together. Looking good, but it's not quite complete yet. I install ammo boxes onto the running boards here. The instructions say that if you want to have a crew figure operating the gun hanging off the left side of the truck, the left ammo box should be omitted. I didn't install said gun, thus no crewman would be standing there if I was going to be using crew, so I installed both boxes. Next, to facilitate turning the truck left and right, I install a steering wheel. This should significantly increase maneuverability. Also, it's easy to put on. Then I install a pintle for a gun in the rear. This is quite simple. You simply stick the pole into the obvious hole for it, and it's done. Well, maybe a bit of nudging until it looks like it's nice and straight. Then it's done. Let's now add the folded down windshields. I think these are interesting. I guess this, along with having no cab roof, is a weight-saving measure for transporting these by air. These do seem to have canvas covers on them, which means it would look a bit silly if you modelled them in the up position, but you could if you wanted. I'm fine with them in the down position, and I think they look quite good. Next come these, I don't know what they're called, ramps? And I think these are for climbing obstacles or crossing gaps. I nudge it around until it looks to be in the correct position. The instructions insist that you put this one on the left side, and the one on the right side is optional. You could instead install a spare wheel there. As I assume you can see, I've chosen 2 of these rampy things. Next, I attach a pair of rolls. I don't know what these actually are. Covers for the truck? Gigantic socks? Who knows? They go on the front mudguards and fit quite nice and easily, though they do seem to have a particular way around that they should go. The box art doesn't actually show these, which makes me think they're optional, and I don't see a particular problem with leaving them off, other than having to fill in the mounting holes. The final part is a gun for the rear mount. There is also an option for a gun mount on the left running board that I mentioned earlier, but I've chosen to leave that off. There is a choice of guns here, and I've chosen the Bren Gun, which has a drum magazine. Or at least I think it's a Bren. The instructions say it's a Bren. Not being a gun surgeon though, I'm not totally sure. The other choice was a Lewis gun. It is nice to have a choice of guns. It means you'll have a few left over, and you can use those as decorations on bases or terrain, or anything else you'd like really. At any rate, the 28mm scale Chevrolet 30 hundredweight truck by Rubicon Models is now complete. I'm very happy with how this has turned out, and it was a delight to build, and I do say it quite often, but that's not really surprising if you've built pretty much any Rubicon kit before. The vehicle itself looks interesting, and a bit odd, which is obviously something I like, and it looks like it's capable of doing some sick jumps, so it's perfect for my bolt action forces. What do you mean doing jumps isn't part of bolt action? Anyway, it's a cool model and I'm sure it has its uses in the game. Also, I think this is going to be fun to paint into a desert scheme, which isn't something I do very often. I don't have any immediate plans to paint this though, so don't go holding your breath, but it is on my list, so it'll get done sooner than some other things. I'm no expert on this or any vehicle, but I think the details are pretty accurate and it looks rather good. There are bound to be omissions here and there to make moulding this practical, and because it is intended for gaming, so if you're looking for super fine detail, this probably isn't going to be for you. Though of course that isn't to say that the detail on this thing is bad, quite the opposite in my opinion. Anyway, if you're looking for one of these, I think this kit would be a great choice, and it gets a hearty thumbs up from me. You can't see me doing the thumbs up, but I did it. I rather enjoyed building this model, and I would happily do it again. I mean, I don't think I have a need to, but if I did, I wouldn't complain about it. And I managed to put this together in one stream, so I would imagine, if you aren't being distracted by streaming and filming and such, you could whip this thing together in under an hour. Not that there's any rush or anything, and I do always recommend that you build models at the speed that suits you best, because it is a hobby and you should enjoy it, without feeling a need to rush. Maybe I'm waffling a bit now. Anyway, come watch me build models on stream sometime. There's a link in the description. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the comment section below, and if you haven't done so already, why not subscribe, follow, ring the bell, become a patron or YouTube member, or maybe just come say hi on Discord or Twitch. And if you are feeling really helpful, why not share this video with your friends, enemies, or anybody you think might get something out of it. Links to all of my things are in the description below, and, as always, I shall return soon. So, until then, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.